The whiskey was still running down the front of my shirt when my boss handed me a mop and said, "Nobody cares what you used to be. You're a waitress now." For a second, I just stood there. The whole restaurant had gone quiet. Not completely quiet. There was still the clink of silverware somewhere near the back. A country song playing softly through the ceiling speakers. The hiss of a steak hitting the grill in the kitchen. But the kind of quiet that happens when everybody sees something wrong and nobody knows what to do next. I looked down at my shirt. The whiskey had soaked through the fabric and left a dark stain across my chest. My knee was already throbbing. Now my pride was too. And somehow that hurt worse. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 44 years old. I spent 20 years in the Army before a training accident ended my career earlier than I ever imagined. These days, I worked nights at Dawson's Roadhouse just outside Columbus, Ohio, a few miles off Interstate 70. Not exactly where I pictured myself ending up. But life doesn't always ask for your opinion. Especially after injury. Especially after retirement. Especially after you've spent most of your adult life wearing a uniform, and suddenly nobody cares about your rank, your experience, or the fact that you used to manage supply operations worth millions of dollars. Now I carried trays. And on that particular Friday night, I was carrying a lot more than trays. The dinner rush had started around 6. By 7:30, every table was full. Families, truck drivers, retired couples, local regulars, the usual crowd. I had already walked nearly 5 miles according to the step counter on my phone. Every step felt like somebody tapping a hammer against my right knee. I smiled anyway. You learn that in customer service. Actually, you learn it in the Army too. Keep moving. Handle the mission. Complain later. An older woman at table 12 noticed my limp. She tilted her head. "Honey, that knee bothering you again?" I laughed. "That obvious," she grinned. "Only to people who've had knees longer than patience." Her husband chuckled. I liked them. People like that made the job bearable. I poured their coffee. We talked about Ohio weather for a minute. Then the front door opened. And everything changed. The 2 men walked in like they owned the building. Expensive suits, expensive watches. The kind of confidence money buys when nobody has told you no for a long time. One was tall and silver-haired. The other was heavier, red-faced, already smelling like alcohol. Rick, my boss, practically sprinted toward them. "Mark, Victor, good to see you." That told me everything I needed to know. VIP customers. Great. Rick grabbed menus himself, something he never did for normal customers. The heavier guy, Victor, pointed toward a booth. "We'll take that one." The family sitting there looked startled. Rick smiled nervously. "I'll get them moved." I actually thought I had misheard him. But he did it. Made a family move tables. Just to keep these 2 happy. The little girl looked confused. Her father looked embarrassed. The businessmen didn't care. Not even a little. 10 minutes later, Rick assigned them to my section. Lucky me. I grabbed my notepad and walked over. "Evening, gentlemen." Victor looked at my leg. Then at my face. Then back at my leg. What's with the limp? Straight to it. No hello. No manners. Just straight to it. It's an old injury. Sports. Army. That got their attention. Mark leaned back. Military. Yes, sir. Victor smirked. Well, look at that. He lifted his whiskey glass. From serving the country to serving ribeyes. They both laughed. I didn't. I wrote down their drink order. 2 top-shelf whiskeys, large pours. As I turned to leave, Victor called after me. "Don't forget to smile." I kept walking. The next hour got worse. Every time I stopped by the table, there was another comment. Another joke. Another little dig. Nothing obvious enough to get them thrown out. Just enough to remind me exactly what kind of men they were. Then came the moment that pushed everything over the edge. Victor pointed at his glass. "Have one with us." I blinked. "I'm working." "1 drink." "I can't." Mark smiled. "You Army people used to follow orders." Something inside me tightened. I kept my voice calm. "I'll bring your check whenever you're ready." I turned away. Then I heard Victor's chair scrape backward. Before I could react, cold liquid hit my chest. Whiskey. A full glass. The smell hit me immediately. The restaurant froze. I looked down. My shirt was soaked. Victor laughed. Actually laughed. Oops. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. Then a chair scraped against the floor. A man stood up near the center of the dining room. Tom Reynolds. One of our regulars. Retired Army mechanic. Late 60s. Always wore a veteran cap. "That's enough," he said. Victor looked annoyed. "Sit down, old man." Tom didn't move. I said, "That's enough." For one brief second, I thought somebody was finally going to do the right thing. Then Rick arrived. Not to defend me. To defend them. Tom, please sit down. Tom stared at him. You're kidding. I'll handle it. You should have handled it already. Rick ignored him. Then he looked at me. Not Victor. Not Mark. Me. Sarah, clean this up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He poured whiskey on me. Rick shrugged. And they're paying customers. I stared at him. So what am I? His answer came instantly. Replaceable. The word hit harder than the whiskey. Then he grabbed a mop from a nearby closet and pushed it into my hands. The entire restaurant watched. Nobody spoke. Rick lowered his voice. Nobody cares what you used to be. You're a waitress now. I don't remember walking away. I just remember ending up behind the restaurant near the dumpster. Breathing hard. Trying not to cry. Trying not to throw something. Trying not to go back inside and lose the last bit of self-control I had left. A few minutes later, the back door opened. I heard footsteps. Tom. He stood beside me without saying anything for a moment. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. Cars rushed along Interstate 70 in the distance. Finally, he spoke. You were Major Mitchell, weren't you? I looked at him. Not anymore. Tom shook his head. Funny thing about rank. I said nothing. He looked toward the restaurant. Then back at me. Sometimes it disappears from paperwork long before it disappears from people. For the first time all night, somebody made me feel seen. Not pitied. Not managed. Seen. Then Tom reached into his pocket and handed me a folded napkin. A phone number was written on it. Call her tomorrow. Who is she? Someone who might want to hear about those two men. I looked down at the number, then back at him. What are you talking about? Tom's expression changed. Just slightly. Enough to make my stomach tighten. Let's just say those boys may have talked a little too much tonight. I stared at the napkin in my hand like it might explain itself. It didn't. Just a phone number written in blue ink, the numbers slightly shaky like Tom had scribbled it fast. Someone who might want to hear about those two men he'd said. That was all. Then he went back inside before I could ask another question. I stayed out by the dumpster another minute, breathing in cold Ohio air and old fryer grease, trying to decide if I was angry, embarrassed, or just tired. Maybe all three. When I finally walked back into Dawson's, nobody looked directly at me. That was almost worse than the whiskey. People suddenly found their mashed potatoes fascinating. Men checked their phones. A woman at table 6 gave me a sad little smile, the kind people give when they want to help but don't want trouble. Rick pointed toward the dining room. Table 9 needs refills. I looked at him. My shirt's soaked. He didn't even blink. Then finish your tables and change after close. There was a time in my life when I would have had 20 soldiers waiting for my decision. Drivers, warehouse clerks, supply sergeants, contractors. People who didn't always like me, but they listened because the job mattered. Now this man with a stained tie and a hairpiece that shifted when he got nervous was telling me to serve iced tea with whiskey drying on my skin. And I did it. That's the part people don't like to admit. Sometimes dignity doesn't look like a speech. Sometimes it looks like surviving the shift because rent is due Tuesday. I picked up the pitcher and went back out. Mark and Victor were still in their booth, laughing like nothing had happened. Victor raised his empty glass. There she is. I stopped at the edge of the table. Can I get you anything else? Mark smiled. You're very professional, I'll give you that. Victor leaned forward, his eyes red and mean. Bet she learned that in the army. Yes, sir. No, sir. Whatever you say, sir. I didn't answer. He tapped the table. Another round. I wrote it down. As I turned, Mark said something quieter. Make sure it's the good stuff. We've got a long drive to Dayton in the morning. Victor snorted. Not too early. Warehouse boys can wait. Mark shot him a look. Keep your voice down. Now I'd spent enough years around loud men in uniform and louder men in suits to know when a joke wasn't really a joke. I kept walking, but my ears stayed behind. At the service station, I poured water, not whiskey, just to buy myself a second. Their company name had been bothering me since Rick said hello. Halpern. Crane. I knew those names. Not personally. Not like friends. More like the way you remember a smell from a bad room you never wanted to enter again. When I came back, Mark was talking with his hands. Big gestures, big watch flashing under the lights. The state loves veterans, he said. You put a flag on the brochure, they stop reading the numbers. Victor chuckled. Careful. What Mark looked right at me. She's a waitress. She's not taking minutes. I set the drinks down. My fingers did not shake. I was proud of that. Anything else? Victor looked me up and down. You got a veteran's discount for yourself? Mark laughed too hard. I gave him the check. No, sir, but I can bring you a box for the food you barely touched. That shut him up for half a second. Not long, but enough. I walked away before my mouth got me fired faster than Rick was already considering. Near the register, Tom stood with his coat over one arm. He waited until Rick disappeared into the kitchen. Then he stepped closer. You okay? I almost laughed. Number. He nodded like that was the only honest answer. I'm sorry I didn't do more. You did more than most. Still didn't feel like enough. It never does. He glanced toward Mark and Victor's booth. You heard them talking. About Dayton and veterans contracts. I looked at him more carefully. What do you know? Not enough. But I sit on a small accountability committee through the VFW. Mostly boring stuff. Budgets, grant complaints. People asking why money meant for veterans keeps ending up in someone's cousin's consulting firm. That sounds about right. Tom pulled his cap lower on his forehead. I know a woman named Ellen Brooks, retired Government Accountability Office, sharp as a tack, mean as a wet cat when people waste public money. Despite myself, I smiled. That's the phone number. Yes. Why would she care what happened in a steakhouse? Because those men weren't just being ugly. His voice dropped. They were careless. I looked over his shoulder. Victor had his phone out now, showing Mark something on the screen. Both of them were grinning. Tom followed my eyes. You remember their company? I'm trying to. Halpern Crane Defense Solutions. There it was. The full name landed in my chest like a dropped toolbox. Halpern Crane? I had seen it before. Years ago? On delivery records, replacement parts, inventory disputes, the kind of paperwork nobody outside logistics ever wanted to read, which made it the perfect place to hide rot. I swallowed. What do they do now? Veterans support services, from what Ellen told our committee. Job placement, equipment grants, transportation programs. They've got contracts in 3 counties and they're trying for more. I looked back at the booth. Men like that loved veterans in speeches. They loved us in commercials. They loved us in black and white photos with flags behind us. But put one of us in front of them with a bad knee and an apron. Suddenly we were furniture. Rick came out of the kitchen and gave Tom a warning look. Tom didn't care. He tucked a $5 bill under his coffee cup, then said, "Call her. Or don't. Your choice." I don't even know what I'd say. Start with the truth. He buttoned his coat and walked toward the door. At the booth, Victor called out, "Hey, old man, you her bodyguard now?" Tom paused. He turned slow as Sunday. "No," he said, "just a witness." That wiped a little shine off Victor's face. Not much, but I saw it. 5 minutes later, Mark and Victor finally left. They did not apologize. Of course they didn't. Victor tossed 2 crumpled 20s on the table like he was feeding pigeons. Rick picked them up and smiled like he'd won something. After closing, I changed into the spare sweatshirt I kept in my car and drove home through the quiet streets of Columbus. It was after 1 in the morning. The city had that tired look it gets when all the hardworking people are asleep and all the lonely people are still awake. My apartment was on the 2nd floor of a brick building in Reynoldsburg. The stairs were murder on my knee, especially after a double shift. I climbed them one at a time. Inside, I kicked off my shoes, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there too long. The napkin was still in my pocket. I set it on the nightstand. Then I pulled an old plastic storage tub from the closet. Army Personnel was written on masking tape across the lid. I hadn't opened it in almost a year. Inside were coins, photos, old orders, a folded uniform jacket, and the kind of memories that don't ask permission before they hurt you. Near the bottom was a brown folder from 2018. I knew what it was before I opened it. A support memo, supply discrepancies, missing confirmations, inflated replacement parts. And there, printed halfway down the page, was the name I had been trying to place all night. Halpern Crane Defense Solutions. I sat back on the floor. My knees screamed. My hands went cold. Those men hadn't just humiliated me. They had dragged an old thread right back into my hands. And this time I wasn't sure I could let go. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I took 2 ibuprofen, put a heating pad under my knee, and turned on the little fan beside my bed because I'd always slept better with noise. Nothing worked. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Victor's hand tipping that glass, then Rick's face. Not angry, not ashamed. Annoyed, like I had inconvenienced him by being humiliated in the middle of his restaurant. Around 3:30 in the morning, I gave up pretending. I made coffee in the dark and sat at my kitchen table with the 2018 folder spread open in front of me. The pages smelled like dust and old cardboard. Most people would have seen boring paperwork. Item codes, delivery dates, invoice references, warehouse stamps. To me, it was a language I used to speak every day. And once I started reading, pieces came back. Back then, I was stationed at Fort Moore, Georgia. It was still called Fort Benning by most of us because old habits die slower than official name changes. I was a logistics officer, not a detective. I tracked what came in, what went out, what got lost, what got broken, and what somebody tried to claim had magically vanished. In 2018, I got pulled into a review because 3 units had reported delays on the same categories of equipment. Basic field support items. Nothing glamorous. Not tanks. Not helicopters. Just the stuff people don't think about until it isn't there. Protective cases, replacement components, vehicle support parts, medical transport gear. The invoices looked clean at first. That was the problem. Too clean. Same vendor. Same rounded numbers. Same delivery windows. Same missing signatures. And sitting right there in the middle of it was Halpern Crane Defense Solutions. I remembered bringing it up. I remembered the room. Bad coffee. Flickering light. A captain clicking his pen like he wanted me to stop talking before I even started. I remembered saying, "Sir, these delivery confirmations don't match the receiving logs." And I remembered the answer. "Major, stay in your lane." I had said, "Sir, supply is my lane." He didn't like that. A week later, the review got folded into something bigger. Then it disappeared. Or maybe I let it disappear. That was the thought I couldn't shake. Maybe I had been tired. Maybe I had accepted the brush off because I had 1,000 other problems on my desk. Maybe I told myself somebody higher up would handle it. That's the lie that keeps bad things alive. Somebody else will handle it. At 7 in the morning, I called the number Tom had given me. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Brooks." "No, hello." "Just Brooks." "Is this Ellen Brooks?" "Depends who's asking." "My name is Sarah Mitchell. Tom Reynolds gave me your number." A pause. Then the waitress. That stung more than it should have. "Former Army logistics officer," I said. Another pause. This one felt different. "Tom said you had a rough night." That's one way to put it. He also said you heard 2 Halpern Crane executives talking. I did. "Can you prove that?" I looked at the folder. "Not yet." "Then be careful how much you say." I almost hung up. Not because she was rude, because she was right. So I took a breath and told her the simple version. The restaurant. The whiskey. The comments. The Dayton warehouse. The line about flags on brochures. The old memo. Ellen didn't interrupt, not once. When I finished, she said, "Do you still have that memo?" "Yes." "Do not send it to me from a work email. Do not photograph it."